Hello, this is Will Harold, the energy hunter with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, coming to you from Southern Oregon in the Rogue River Valley. I'm here today with the Walter Russell Secret of Light group. We've expanded our group a little bit. Some people who've been longtime members are finally able to join. So welcome for the people who haven't joined before and those that haven't been here for a long time. And always welcome back to the people who come each week and are so dedicated to discussing these issues. As you know, for Akashic Intelligence, we mainly concentrate on Walter Russell. We talk about Rudolf Steiner. We talk about different types of energies and esoteric philosophies, all the way to Alice Bailey and Theosophy. And also, we talk a little bit about magic and grimoires. Today, we are actually finishing up the fourth part of the book that by Wilhelm Reich called Ether, God, and Devil. And we're actually only really covering chapter 6, I believe, because it talks about cosmic orgone energy and ether. So this is the last portion of that we're talking about. So we've been in this, the first video, for those that haven't seen the videos before, really goes over a lot of his history and some of the definitions that he uses, so that if you're watching this and you don't quite understand some of the words we're using, go back and watch some of the previous videos. I go through his whole vocabulary and what he used to describe orgone and different aspects of orgone in his practice. As some of you may or may not know, William Reich was a psychotherapist from the school of Freud. He was a contemporary of Jung's. He and Jung were basically two of Freud's prize pupils. Reich stayed with the psychotherapy and went down the sexual energy route, which he called orgone, from the orgasm. And Jung kind of went an esoteric route to discover and talk about aspects of the mind through more of esoteric Christianity. Not so much in public, but very private, and also documented in his later works. So today, as I said, we're going to talk about William Reich, and this is going to get more into the nuts and bolts of the orgone devices. So this is called William Reich, Part 4, Cosmic Orgone Energy and Ether, the concentration of orgone energy, orgone sensitivity to the observer, orgone accumulators. And we're going to talk a little bit about a new person who we haven't talked about yet, who is Michael Faraday and the Faraday Cage, because it does relate, I think, to some of the ideas of orgone, or maybe why the orgone structure of the accumulators that Reich put together may have certain aspects that are beneficial in more ways than just orgone themselves. So as we look at some of these photos here, this is actually the Orgone Cloudbuster that it was put together by Reich. And as you can see, this was really meant to be almost like a gun that would point at certain things. And we're going to get into what to point at later on as we get more into the discussion slides. And they also had these cables that were meant to be put in water, and I'll show that in the diagram in later. But this is kind of an idea of what that may look like.
Not power cables?
Well, they go into the water.
Very
And
cool.
I'll show that. I have that in a bigger diagram. And then over here, we have the Faraday Cage, which is from Michael Faraday, which is a cage that protects the people inside from electrical impulses. And this is if you had an electrical charge and you're in the cage, an EMP would not affect anything inside this cage. And this is often used for testing equipment and so on that they don't want to be influenced or to be affected by electromagnetic impulses. Here's a room that's actually more of a stylized room, maybe for an EMP event, in which they actually have this with aluminum foil and kind of pillowed out so that you could actually shield yourself from EMPs and electromagnetic waves.
Looks like something for the insane, actually.
Well, it could be. It could be those that want to bounce off the walls, those that wear the tinfoil caps. But it actually is made to be more of an electromagnetic barrier. So here's a picture of Michael Faraday. He's from around the 1866 or so. This is the device he made, which was the first electric generator that was patented. So he was before Edison and all those other people with how to produce electricity with his disc, running on this electromagnetic brake system. Over here, we have different types of orgone. We have the basic one that is sold quite a bit on the internet, which is the orgonite that's in a resin that compresses the crystals and metals inside and has a shape that allows for vortexes to occur. In the middle, we have a geometric winding of copper cables that is supposedly a electromagnetic device also for protection and to produce orgone. And then above, we kind of have everything combined. We have an orgone base with the orgone pipes, with crystals, with triangles, with the ring. So this is actually kind of like, you know, putting together biogeometry and orgone together to create devices that take both access form, angle, and material. So before we move on, I know there's some people who'd like to comment on some of these images. Anyone would like to comment?
I got one.
Which one do you have? I think you have all of them, don't
Like
you?
the ring one. It's a little different though. I don't know if you can see it. It's like got 2 layers. And then, you know, you could open it. It's from the same people that made that, I'm pretty sure. Is that your Tesla? Is that your orgone thing?
Who? Which one?
The one in the top left?
No. That's just one. This is just some pictures I pulled off the internet that kind of showed different aspects of orgone.
I got that one that's like 10 feet in the corner of my yard still.
Yeah, I have 2 of those too. And we're going to talk a little bit about if we're actually using those in the right manner.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I have that other device though, that thing that I put in the ground. And then I have these geomagnetic things that you put on the corners of your property. And they supposedly, you know, you have to dig them down. And supposedly they, you know, help something. I guess whatever you imagine they help, they'll help.
Like the earth pipes.
They're different. I'll show them to you sometime. They're pretty cool.
Did you?
Yeah, I just saw yesterday that they make a copper pyramid like that to put over your bed. So I think there's something with the copper, not just with the geometry shape, but with the copper itself.
And that's where we're combining different, you know, disciplines. Like I said, with the biogeometry, with the form, with the angle, and so on.
Try scalar though. They make the scalar stuff that you put on one on each side of the bed.
Yeah, I have one of those.
That's pretty cool stuff.
That's cool.
Does it work?
Yeah, I mean, I actually do a lot with water with it. I do a lot of structuring water and structuring different materials into water through it.
Is it the one from what's their names?
From Spooky?
Yeah. Same company?
Yeah.
I think Crow talked about it once. It helped his mom.
Any more?
Faraday Cage.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that similar? Well, in a small fraction, the Faraday bag that
Yes.
Yeah, that we put the
Phones in.
my mind's going a blank, but those crystals from
from Justin.
From Justin.
Yeah, the EMF rocks.
Yes.
Because a lot of people that don't understand these bags, they have a feeling that it's going to block everything. So I guess maybe we'll cover that or something.
They do harmonize. They're supposed to harmonize the EMFs, I believe.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about the construction of the Faraday cage.
Okay, good.
There's also another thing besides the Faraday cage today. There are a device that you can put into your electrical panel.
Yeah,
that will, you know, that stops EMF. I actually have one, but didn't install it. I've had it for about 3 years.
Yeah,
but it's there. I have to think that it's there, so maybe it'll just magically work.
You never know.
No, I never do.
Any more comments before we move on?
Yes, I was going to ask / say something about the the copper sort of flower of life looking little arrangement there. So I've been recently looking at various, let's say, sacred geometries, but geometries of how energy flows. And of course, this one is a very common shape that keeps coming up. So I'm wondering if, like, some of these compositions, when we construct them with the copper wire, where it's not a single wire, like as you would see, you know, on the picture above, you would create those spirals, I'm guessing, from a single thread. But when you have like overlapping, is that I mean, how can one even calculate or comprehend like the direction of the energy each time, you know, these wires touch and all that? Because on some of the layers, there's like, on the same points, there's like 3 of these rings matching up and all that. So I was just wondering about the whole flow of the energy or the currents or whatever flows in them when it's constructed in such a way, when it's not one coil.
Well, again, you know, you have each of the circles, each of the images or circles would have a point in the center, right? That would actually be a vortex in itself. The overall ring would create a vortex in the very center of the large. So you have a lot of energy being generated here because of the shape and the angles. The flow of the energy will still stay pretty much within a Russell concept of vortexes up and down, but you have a lot going on in this shape that you're not really trying to say which way is the flow of energy, because you're trying to bring, you know, the whole thing is really an antenna energy generator that's bringing the vortexes from above and below and probably expanding to the middle, oblating, as Russell talks about.
Okay, cool. I was just wondering if, like, sometimes these compositions need to be, you know, like if I'm having a go at it myself, you know, I don't want to like undo some things because I don't understand, you know, how the energy is meant to be sort of cycling around in a geometry as such.
They're designed to clear traumas. And the woman that I bought mine from, I can send it to you, she actually tells you how to use it, what it's good for, you know, where to hold it, the whole thing. But she claims that it will clear traumas for you, that you know, just have to do your thing with it. I could send you the link if you want after the call.
And what I'm saying is that you know, there's a lot of different opinions on this depending on who you listen to. And, you know, I'm not saying anyone's right or wrong, but each one may have a different opinion of how they're using the device based on sacred geometry and based on the twining of the copper.
And what you believe it's going to do. Because that's everything. We are creators.
Yeah. It's like a talisman almost.
If you know what it's going to do, believe it, and hard enough, you have to know it, it will do it.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so like I said, this is the last part. We went through items 1 through 7 on the previous discussion. So if anybody is not aware of that, you can go to the Akashic Intelligence and watch that on YouTube for the previous discussion that we had. So right now, can you mute, Doug? You're coming through.
Huh?
Can you mute your microphone?
Sorry.
So for right now, we're going to talk about the concentration of orgone. And so basically what Reich created, and we talked about this a little bit before, was he created this box, which he called the Orgone accumulator, which is a plywood box, which had a metal inside and a metal door. And this metal, as we talked about, would actually cap, once the door was shut, it had to be it didn't have to be airtight, but it had to be light tight. And you would shut the door, and from what he said, you'd begin to accumulate this orgone inside the box, because you're really trapping a portion of the orgone inside these metals walls, and it couldn't escape out. But as we know, ether is everywhere, orgone's ether. So it's, you know, the idea of it really escaping, but what you really want to do is make sure it concentrates. And so once you shut the door, your body's going to excite that ether or excite that orgone. And also, if you put a coil in there, as you talked about, you'd get other aspects of orgone. So this is the orgone accumulator. This was the orgone box with orgone shooter. So this was a box that was constructed basically the same way, but it had a hose that went into it, and you would breathe in the orgone through this, like you would huff, hydrogen gas or whatever you want to. That Brown's gas. This is the idea that you're breathing in the orgone and it's accumulated inside this box. And this is basically the orgone blanket, which is wool, steel wool, wool, steel wool, and wool. And what you're really doing is having an organic layer, a metal layer, an organic layer, a metal layer, and an organic layer. And they've changed this construction based on a few other aspects to create the boxes today. We're going to get into a little bit more of that in some of these other drawings. But I kind of wanted to go over this so as we begin to talk about this orgone concentration. He's talking about the concentration of the orgone inside these accumulators and inside this orgone shooter. 2 to 3-fold concentrations of orgone energy in the atmosphere is indispensable for many orgonomic procedures and experiments. Certain experiments do not succeed in the natural atmospheric concentrations, such as, for instance, the charge in a high vacuum. The necessary concentrations is achieved by the presence of an orgone room or several orgone accumulators in a building where the experiments are carried out. The orgone accumulator is capable of concentrating atmospheric orgone energy by the arrangement of its layering. It consists of 2 or more up to 25 layers, each constructed of non-metallic substances on the outside and sheet iron or steel wool on the inside. This arrangement influences the atmospheric orgone energy in such a manner that it is movement toward the closed space is greater than outward toward the outside. An orgonomic potential is created from the lower level outside toward the higher level inside and is continuously maintained. The orgonomic potential can be demonstrated by the slower discharge of electroscopes on the inside by the constant temperature difference between the upper metal plate T0 minus T. Concentrated orgone energy has many beneficial effects on living organisms, which I have tried to describe in my book, The Cancer Biopathy. So he wrote another book called The Cancer Biopathy, which he talked about how he would use these orgone accumulators to actually aid in the alleviation of cancer within the human body. Here he's talking again about the idea of these orgone accumulators, that by creating this metal box, you're actually beginning to concentrate the orgone that's already there. And then once you put a body inside there, it actually excites the orgone, and it can create different images of orgone with the flashing or the dots that were talked about last week. Here's another idea of a box also, which is Reich's orgone with fiberglass, steel wool, fiberglass. So he's actually calling fiberglass an organic material, steel wool inorganic, and then inside. And so he's saying out here is the etheric energy of the orgone. So this would be the exterior of this box. So this would be this layer right here, right? This would be the exterior layer, organic, or you could put wood here, right? Because it's an organic material. The ambient orgone out here has lower potential. And again, we talked about, remember how we talked within Reich's ideas is that the lower potential would be pulled in by the higher. So here's the higher potential, which is inside because of the concentration. And he's saying that by making this box, this will pull these positive ions in here into the center of the box. But there's also what he would call the deadly orgone, negative etheric energy. So within it, there's a concentration of both that can come through, but there's a preponderance of the positive, which kind of evens out any of the negative effects because there's a higher positive effect. And then here's what is actually a picture of the orgone room that he's talking about, where you see these accumulators and different accumulators in the room. And you can actually, this is what he talked about when he said that in this room, so if you see, he has metal on these walls, and then he has these orgone accumulators. So not only is there being orgone accumulated in here, but the overall room is having orgone accumulated.
But fiberglass is not organic.
Well, he's saying it is. Well, again, he's saying it is. It's spun. I don't know. It's spun from oil, which you can determine whether or not oil is organic or not.
I guess everything on Earth is really organic, right?
Well, in a sense, besides metal. I mean, I think it's really different between metal because you can actually use stone too, I would think. But the idea of how the orgone would pass through it would be a different potential based on the density and if you get the correct effect that you want. Can you mute, Doug? We can hear you eating here. Doug, thank you. Any comments or ideas, or has anyone ever used an orgone accumulator, either the box or the shooter, or actually seen one?
Did Paula do something like that?
No, she was using ozone, not orgone.
Okay.
All right, let's move on here. So here's some actual pictures of orgone accumulators, kind of detailed diagrams if anyone wants to build one. So this is basically 54 inches high. The box has to be at least 6 square feet from what we talked about earlier. So within this box, he actually also has a detail of the seat, which is what he calls the seat they're sitting on. And it also has this panel, which he calls the Christ panel, that you can put up there. But so this is a very detailed idea if you ever want to actually construct an orgone, which I think I'm going to try to construct something like this. It seems pretty simple, and do some experimentation with it. So this would be the orgone accumulator and how that would be constructed. And over here is kind of when we see these little orgone pyramids, why they work. This is a description of why they work. As you can see, we have the toroidal field coming in from the top and the toroidal field coming in from the bottom. And the resin is comprised of 5 organic compounds. It contains feminine traits, sticky and receptive. It is an excellent insulator of electricity, a collector of the unseen. This container is the yin female energy of the balancing. So what's being said is that we're bringing this energy down in this direction. And then we have the piezoelectric effect created by blending certain minerals such as quartz, tourmaline, kyanite, zinc with a plastic that shrinks when cured. When crystals are squeezed, they send off an electric charge. This created electrical charged output is the yang masculine energy of the balancing. So what we're seeing here within, again, and when we see the shapes of the pyramid with the orgone, this is a description of really what's kind of going on electrically or chemically within this idea of the resin squeezing the crystals and then having this piezoelectric effect that when we actually put metal in there too, as we talked about within this chamber, that would excite the orgone also and create a higher organic potential. Any questions on any of this before we move on? Just the shapes and how these things are constructed.
I find it's neat how he describes, I guess, the different stones, I guess. I mean, he says the feminine, well, he says 5 organic compounds. And then he gives us zinc and, like what makes like masculine energy. Yin and yang, and here we go.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
It's back to the concepts of, his whole thing of the sexual energy, right? The male and female, which was also Russell, right? Which is positive and negative of the creation energy.
So it could, I guess we'll be able to understand a bit more what these Cloudbusters are made of then.
Yeah, I have some diagrams. And
in this case, it's an accumulator. It's not a buster.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to show here, and this is part of what he's talking about here, is there's different aspects of orgone energy, and you depending on what device you use, whether you use an accumulator or sometimes they call these generators, orgone generators, not accumulators, but they're called both because they're generating orgone. You set them somewhere, they're generating orgone. So yeah, these have a specific purpose. They're really meant for the body, for air, for the atmosphere, for the biosphere around you, that you're, outputting this energy. The Cloudbusters are really meant, and we're going to talk about those in a bit here, about, doing things with the atmosphere. And again, we see these, these are what we have in the first, but we also have, this is the earth pipe. I didn't want to put this on the cover because it kind of looks like a pipe bomb, but this is, the Orgone, I think they're called earth pipes. That's their name for them, in which you put in the ground also to actually put around trees and things and introduce orgone into the soil.
Earth pipes is right. I think they go under a little bit, right? Completely down.
Yeah, to actually generate that orgone in the ground. And then here we have the Cloudbusters that we were talking about some. This is the one with what was actually Reich's, in which he actually put it on the back of a truck so he could drive it around to certain locations. Here's one that they have on a trailer, but the idea is that you actually would take that, and you saw these coils that come down, they just have them in the ground here. But the idea was that you actually would put those in water, and having them in water would generate a much higher orgone burst or concentration wherever it was pointed. So what really mattered was where you pointed it at. So if you wanted to bust a cloud, so you wanted destruction of clouds through decrease of potential, you would aim it at the cloud, right? And that would draw in the orgone. The device would draw the orgone in, right? And then this would have a potential decrease from the cloud, and it would begin to break the cloud up. So this, so where we just point them in the sky, it would be better if we actually maybe pointed our Cloudbusters at certain areas in the sky for what we actually wanted to do, whether or not we wanted to break them up or making of clouds. So if you want to make clouds, you point them where there are no clouds.
How does the water get involved? What is it? The orgone energy goes into the water?
It's actually drawing. Yeah. See how it's not really putting it out. I mean, it's showing that it's drawing it, right? So it's drawing it, and the water's helping it to draw the orgone. That's what this is showing. This diagram is showing that it's not really shooting, it's actually drawing, and the potential. So when you hit a cloud, you decrease the potential out here, which is going to make this dissipate. And when you point it out here, the potential increases over here, and you make more clouds. So the idea is what do you want to do with it? Do you want to make clouds, or do you want to bust clouds? So if you want to bust clouds, you point it at clouds. If you want to make clouds, you point it in an area next to clouds or just in open sky.
That's completely different than I imagined.
Yeah. It was for me too when I saw the diagrams. And when you really look at the devices that he made, they were meant very much like something you could point, and then had these cables that came down that he just has laying on the ground here, but the idea was to put them in water. Any questions on cloud busting or cloud making using orgone?
He's been around doing this for a little while. How well was he, or wasn't he received?
Well, he was killed. I mean,
well, that would be.
I mean, what he was doing was
well. He certainly knew it.
Yeah, I mean, things that he was doing were working. As far as there's testimonials of people that were using his boxes, and once he was arrested and so on by the FDA, they destroyed all his boxes, all this equipment. But because if it didn't work, then what's the big deal, right? I mean, it's just a bunch of little boxes. But for some reason, they destroyed all that, and it's now just coming, back into being because I mean, I think a lot of this is that a lot of these things that were destroyed are coming back because the allopathic model is failing. Everybody, thought this was all quackery, and they put it out as quack watch and all that kind of stuff. And people lost interest in it, and they were, on the allopathic bandwagon. But now as they're seeing that those practices are failing, people are beginning to look back to say, what was working back then, or what was going on, or how did they actually address these issues in the past. And so some of these ideas are being brought back. So any more questions on the cloud busting or on the Cloudbuster, or what Reich's intention was? You know, he did want a mobile device for sure. But I don't know how critical it was to have the water. But this is something I would like to do here at my place, you know, because I have the river right out in front of me. I could do this very easily in front of my house with the river.
Could be useful when you're having forest fires, eh?
Exactly. So the next thing we're going to talk about here is the Faraday cage. So as I talked about, he invented these in 1836. So this is, you know, pre-Civil War in the United States. And Michael Faraday was the fellow's name, and we saw the pictures on the very front. And the Faraday cage. A Faraday cage or Faraday shield is an enclosure used to block electromagnetic fields. A Faraday shield may be formed by a continuous covering of conductive metal. So a continuous covering of conductive metal is kind of like the Orgone generator a little bit, where we have this sheet metal on the inside. But with the Faraday cage, it doesn't have to be solid. It just needs to be, it can be a wire type cage also. Conductive metal, or in the case of a Faraday cage, by a mesh of such metals. Faraday cages are named after scientist Michael Faraday, who invented them in 1836. A Faraday cage operates because an external electrical field causes the electric charges within the cage's conducting material to be distributed so that they cancel the field's effect in the cage's interior. The phenomenon is used to protect sensitive electronic equipment, from example, RF receivers, from external radio frequencies interferences, often during testing of the alignment of the devices. They are also used to protect people and equipment against actual electrical currents, such as lightning strikes and electrostatic discharges. Since the enclosing cage conducts current around the outside of the enclosed space and none passes through the interior. So, you know, Michael Faraday, this is, you know, where we actually began to test electricity and things like that. So this is 1836. So, you know, this is very close, I think, to the Spanish flu epidemic also, which is kind of amazing. But the idea is that by creating a metal mesh around you, you can actually impede the you know, the electromagnetic effects, the harmful electromagnetic effects of those forces getting in through the cage. So this is the idea of, you know, why people wear the tinfoil cap. You know, by wearing the cap, they think that they're not going to get electromagnetic charges. And from what Faraday says, that is, you know, a concept, but you really kind of have to be totally enclosed by it. So I mean, you have to wear almost like, you know, tinfoil helmet that went around your whole head. But top's good enough, at least your crown chakra. But the idea of having this metal enclosure, you know, greatly resembles the Orgone accumulator, in the sense that you have this metal all around you. So along with what Reich was saying, how it's accumulating, you're actually creating, because it's almost impossible to have an area where you don't have electromagnetic waves, unless you're really far away, you know, in some very, very remote area. But anywhere that you're in, any type of civilized area, you're going to have a lot of electromagnetic waves in the air. And so the idea that you can actually build a room or a cage, you know, you could just do it out of chicken wire, actually, you know, something that's just very, but in theory would shield you from these waves as long as you were enclosed in this cage. And, you know, a lot of military installations have these Faraday cages around their sensitive electrical equipment so they don't get EMP impulses. And the idea is that we have this metal wall around you. So is the absence of electrical field inside, right? So the outside of the cage gets charged by the electricity, and it's kind of carried around, which creates electromagnetic force field almost, in which the inside of the cage is cancels out the applied field, neutralizing the interior of the cage. So I would think that an Orgone accumulator would also work in the very exact manner that it would also become a Faraday cage, because you have metal, all around the inside. So you're getting the benefits both of a Faraday cage and of an Orgone accumulator at the same time. Any questions on the Faraday cage or Michael Faraday?
Did it have to have a metal floor?
No, you don't need to have a metal floor because it's kind of grounded.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is, as long as this is grounded, it's really around the outside. It doesn't hurt to have the metal floor, but the problem is that the electrical current is being around here and you're on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, you'd be better off if you were going to at least put some division between you and the bottom. You don't want to touch this, really.
No.
Was he well received, or?
Yeah, they're still used today.
I know they are. I just wondered, I mean, he came just in time for, well, you said 1836, so way ahead of the computers and the computer rooms. And
yeah, but these are used for a lot of computer rooms, like I said, and for a lot of computer testing. And most, large facilities that have sensitive equipment use some type of Faraday cage for that. But again, it's interesting that Reich's works very similar in the terms of a metal wall, but yet he's not really mentioning Faraday, or I guess he came much after Faraday. So, but again, Reich really wasn't a physicist. He was a psychoanalyst, right? That got into these other aspects as he began to develop his theory of orgone being from the orgasm, and then beginning actually to see how to generate this, ether. He's really, what Reich is really doing is trying to excite the orgone, the ether, and create what he would call orgone through this excitement of the human body through bio, which would be the orgasm or the excitement, ecstasy of the human. But also he could do it with coils and electricity also. So the idea was that once you created the accumulator and got inside, you would excite the orgone through either a body or through. And he said that, I think we can, any more questions on the Faraday cage before I move on?
Yeah, are you assuming that it would work like the Orgone accumulator?
Well, not if it's.
Is that what you said?
Well, what I'm saying is that the Orgone accumulator would act like a Faraday cage.
That way. Okay,
Yeah, because a Faraday cage is porous, right? So it's not really going to be totally enclosed. So the idea that, when you have this idea that you have the orgone coming through the cage, right, like this, that it's going to just go back out. You're just going to have a very fluid thing going on, rather than actually kind of getting in here and becoming caught in the cage and being concentrated. Because if you have an open system, then you don't have this flow of lower potential to higher potential.
Okay, so it would be like a microwave, basically.
And that's, I think the microwave is, when you see this idea of this negative orgone, that's really like radioactivity, right? Like a microwave. But that's why you actually, within the orgone generator, you have a higher concentration of positive orgone instead of the deadly orgone. But that's one thing that you should clean out you should open the door and let the orgone dissipate, and not just stay within it all the time, because you can get a higher concentration of deadly also. It's also said, if you look at this picture right here, where he's actually wearing a glove to hold the pipe, the recommendation when you get a Cloudbuster is you don't touch the copper, because you can get some of that deadly orgone also.
Okay.
Any more questions on the Faraday cage or Michael Faraday? Okay. So the orgonotic potency and sensitivity of the observer. So now what we're going to talk about, as Reich did his experimentation with the ideas of orgone, of the orgasm and the ecstasy, creating this excitement of orgone energy. He's going to talk now, again, these are his words from the book. He's going to talk a bit about how the potency and sensitivity of the observer. So the human organism with low orgonotic potency, again, orgonotic is just the ability to produce orgone potency, or severe armoring. Now, some of you who may have not watched the previous discussions, one of Reich's chief theories was that humans had developed this armoring around their heart or around their ability to exude ecstasy or emotions, and he called that armoring. And what he said is that because most people could not experience true ecstasy, that he saw within women and within his patients within the clinic, which he had done for 25 years, that this armoring had made them become much more neurotic. That neurosis was formed because they could not actually express their sexuality and express true ecstasy, and that this armoring was reflecting back, and in order to get through the armoring, it could only, the sexual energy or this idea of this ecstasy could only be broken through the armoring with rage and so on. So he gets, I think it's probably in one of the first or second ones we did where we really went into, I know it's in the first one we talk about the definitions of what this armoring is, but it was a big concept that Reich put forth, was that the reason that we as humans could not actually access our heart potential, because through our programming, through the programming of churches and of different aspects of our lives, that we were unable to actually express true emotion, and therefore we were always being withheld from this, almost etheric expression, which was, what his opinion was, what caused much of the disease. So the human with low organic potency or severe armoring, so someone who has a lot of overlays that can't really experience joy or ecstasy, do not perceive orgone energy phenomena easily, in contradiction to healthy organisms. So what he's saying is that if you have this heavy armoring, you cannot experience the orgone as much. So what he's saying is that our bodies, the structure of our bodies and how much armor we have based on emotional and traumas can affect our ability to actually absorb orgone because we are now a lower energy. Since we can't do that, then the higher energy of potentials around us, and therefore they're draining us constantly. So if we have high electrical charge, if we're in a very high, say a room that has a lot of EMF exposure, and we have low orgone potential, it will drain us. So the idea is that, the higher that are, and with, again, this is Reich, not me, but the idea that Reich's putting forth here is that the higher our orgonotic potency, the better that we can withstand these other influences outside of us. People suffering from cancerous shrinking biopathy do not feel the orgone in the accumulator until after several days or even weeks, until they have become sufficiently charged. Orgonotic perception, too, is weakened in observers with low orgonotic potencies. Such experience will, for instance, not be able to produce lumination in a gas tube. Furthermore, they will have difficulties in discerning the light phenomenon in the dark, and they will be unsure about the sensation of heat and prickling that the well-charged organism perceives so easily. So what he's saying, again, this is about the observer and their sensitivity, that the ones that he saw that had low orgonotic potency could not see or experience the healing effects of the orgone as quickly as those that had higher potency. It would take longer for them to see this. And again, it's really, the biopathy, as he says, is, if someone has this low potential, it's very difficult for them to excite the orgone in the room. It's all about the excitation of the orgone that's being captured within these metal walls of the accumulator. So, you can create more excitement within these structures by introducing a coil or other organic methods, or actually maybe you can put an Orgone accumulator, like a little pyramid in there, may make up for the idea that the body can't do that. The biophysical structure of the observer is therefore of the utmost importance in orgonomic work. Severely armored individuals easily develop anxiety in the dark room when they become aware of illumination. On occasions, they react with panic. They will try to interpret away the phenomenon with empty words such as it's only subjective or it's mere suggestion or similar statements. The structure of the observer is as of importance since it is the organismic Orgone energy, in the sense organs that reacts to the external Orgone phenomena. The inclusion of the structure of the observer in the judgment of natural phenomena is very important, if not decisive, step toward the integration of the subjective and objective, the psyche and the physical. It is chiefly the ignorance of the biophysical and depth psychological functioning of the observer that has led mechanistically oriented scientists into the dead end street where theoretical physics finds itself today. So what he's saying here is, again, that how much orgonomic potency the person that walks into the room has, that is going to be directly related to how effective the treatment is and how well he can see or experience the Orgone. So it's funny because he talks about the idea that, people that have this low or orgonomic potency, when they get in, they can become very, they react with panic. And I often saw this when we were doing the ice baths at Music and Sky. Some people can just get in the bath. I just got in the bath and it was cold, don't get me wrong, but you settle down. Those that had kind of, erratic behaviors or erratic emotional patterns, they would sit down in the ice bath and they would jump up immediately, because they had such panic of the ice or the cold or whatever. And so I can kind of relate some of that to the idea of the ice bath also, because you're introducing something new to the system that's actually, really going after the sensations. And so the idea that that the more orgonomic potency you have, the more you're going to be able to experience, the ideas of the Orgone and see it. And he's saying here, some people try to, say it's not happening or it is suggestion. And there could be some of those issues that, it is suggestion and it is the ideas. But it's also the idea is, if we are integrated with both positive and negative with our sexual experience, that we are free to express our emotional bodies, that we may be open to other energies of the Orgone and of the atmosphere and of the ether that are trying to be suppressed today by our programming and the ideas that we're being given. So that, again, this is from 25 years of clinical work as a depth psychologist, in which Reich was, and he later, got more into the ideas of physics and of quantum mechanics. Any questions before I move on to the last paragraph here, just in the ideas of orgonomic potency?
Well, that would be me jumping up out of the ice bath.
Didn't want to call anybody up, Brian.
I have a comment. Yeah, I think that, I work with energy a lot, and there's that book, The Emotion Code. He talks a lot about the heart wall and the emotions that it's almost like a heart building. You have to take that wall down kind of slow. Like, it can't be done very fast because the person will experience too much, anxiety or whatever. So I just think that's really interesting that you could actually create a box that someone could experience that without having to go through the thought processes behind it. I think I would like to try that out if you make one.
Well, and for me too, it's kind of like, that's why I like tuning forks, because the observer or the patient or whatever you want to call it doesn't really matter what their beliefs are, what they think, right? It's just their body self-tuning. And that's kind of the idea with Orgone, is it doesn't really matter that much, what the person thinks. I'm sure if they're not open to it, like he talks about here, you're not going to let your body heal no matter what happens, because you have so much overlay and armoring as we talked about. But if you are and you are open to it, then it's more of just a gradual thing, and it's a passive type of system that you can heal with, rather than an active system. And there, as far as I know, there are no negative effects, unless you, like I said, maybe stay in. I wouldn't stay in an Orgone box, for days, without. I do treatments of, I think, even he recommends, less than 8 hours a day, because you may have the effects of the negative Orgone over time. So yeah, I do like that.
Fascinating. Yeah, that's really cool.
Okay, any more before I move on? Okay, so these scientists who otherwise have demonstrated such an excellent critical sense of inquiry are still adhering to old, outmoded psychological thinking. They cling to a consciousness that somehow has no bias in the organism, no rooting in biophysical processes. They are unaware of the great progress that has been made during the first part of the century in connecting the functions of perception with the functions of the emotion, and in connecting the emotions with bioenergetic, i.e. truly physical processes in the observing and reasoning organism. Natural scientific research is an activity that rests on the interaction between observer and nature, or expressed differently, between organotic functions inside and the same functions outside the observer. Thus, the character structure and the senses of perception in the observer are major, if not decisive, tools of natural research. We do not doubt for a moment that the psychological structure of a surgeon plays a decisive role in the operation he performs, or that the sense of balance and rapid movement in the flyer are decisive for the mastery of aviation. But in natural research, this principle has been badly neglected and misinterpreted. I fear that it is the emotional, and within the emotional realm, especially the biosexual functions, that have kept the classical researcher from closing the gap between observing biopsychic and observed biophysical nature. So again, we have Reich, who is talking as a clinical psychiatrist or psychologist, or depth psychologist, what you want to say. And the one reason that I wanted to look at Reich is because where we were getting with Alice Bailey and white magic was we were pulling totally away from our emotions and only really viewing everything from the mental plane. And what Reich's saying here, again, he's a psychologist, he's not a mystic at all. He doesn't really believe in mystics. He believes in, forces outside of the human, cosmic forces, but he's not really a mystic in the sense where he believes in angels and, hierarchies and a God figure. But he's saying that he believes that it's the emotions that we do have to engage to actually kind of close these gaps. And maybe, the discussion I'm kind of looking for here is, as we, do we just go to the mental plane, or do we actually try to, as Bailey says, we need right thinking, but do we also need right emotions? Do we need to actually, the reason that we can't invoke our emotions in a Bailey scenario is because we have the armory, right? That has corrupted our emotions, and we can't take part in our emotions. I don't know if anyone here uses heart math. I know that Cosmic talks a lot about heart math. But within heart math, the concept is that as we concentrate, within our meditations, that we bring in the emotional aspect to actually give the, the thought form this extra power to be, bring it forth into reality, and that the emotions used rightly are a very powerful tool along with the mental images that we're creating. So any ideas on that from anybody about the idea of actually, using the emotions in a positive way rather than just throwing them out, baby with the bathwater type thing?
Will, when we studied Bailey, when I read the book, I don't know if I got it wrong, but I understood that actually the emotions were needed to kind of power the thought. You know, the desire was needed to power the thought. So I did not read her suggestions to be, you know, about like eliminating the emotions. That's what I understood from my first reading. But I do believe that you need both. Power the thoughts with the heart energy, the love and feel emotions and so on. Emotions, movement.
And what she said was we kind of have to begin to detach from the emotions and just kind of look at it as a very mental plane aspect. So she was really not evoking, she was evoking more the will than the emotion. So the will and emotion are a little bit different, right? Will's kind of the tenacity. The emotion is actually kind of the feeling body, the etheric body more.
Yeah.
And like I said, the idea of this armoring that we're talking, because the idea is, and you know, is that what I'm seeing is that we're getting to where we're saying we have to invoke this heart, right? We have to invoke the heart. We have to get just away from the head. But for me, and I'll admit it, is, you know, I don't know what love is. I don't know what so many of these, you know, emotions that we talk about are, because I think we've been so overlaid and so programmed that, you know, to either suppress our emotions or that they're the wrong emotion, or, you know, that this is the emotion, that love is lust, and, you know, all these other kind of things, that for us to really get into what our emotional body is, into a right experience of emotion, a right experience of ecstasy or sexual intimacy or whatever, is so kind of convoluted now that it's very difficult for us as humans to invoke those within a practice.
Well, when we go further in the book, which we're going to be going to next, I guess, yes, it goes from the mental, and then what it is it plants a seed in your consciousness, and then as you brood over this thing, you know, at every meditation, eventually an idea will pop in there, that a purpose, something that you want to create. So I'll pick a book, and you know, you've got this book, you're going to write, you're writing it to reach the audience, for people to want to pick it off the shelf. You're going to wrap it in emotions that will have an effect, will have an impact on whatever it is you're delivering. So that's how I understand it from, and yes, when you send that baby out, meaning that creation, you have to learn to be disconnected from it, so that when it goes out there, that you don't get pulled with it. And if you send it, if your body is not clear enough, then what happens, it will die, because you did not include, you didn't send it at the right time. It's a question of timing. So there's other stuff to do with emotions that we're going to learn. But yeah, I mean, the first step around the way is to be able to see our emotions, to see, you know, I guess, calm our body, you know, all those good things. But yeah, we have to come from the heart. We have to come from the head. There's so many places. And I'm just so happy in our group. We're also doing a lot of the heart part, because we got to have this, yeah, well, we have to have an opening in the heart for sure.
I'd like to also add some. Oh, sorry. You go ahead.
Bad guys love negative energy. Love is like the opposite of what they want.
Okay. Go ahead, Gabby.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to add that I think Chantal is right, and also I think this concept is correct in terms of needing the emotion, because from my studies of quantum manifestation, the purpose of the emotion, which is generated by the heart, is to increase the potency of a manifested reality. So all the realities are infinite, like however many ways something can turn out, but the reality that we're going to end up experiencing is always going to be the one with the highest potency, the one that had the highest potential to manifest. So in order for you to kind of change trajectory or amplify the potency of a specific, like an idea that you have to involve the emotion, because that's basically the fuel, like that amplifies the frequency of the heart, of the desire, and that gets basically sent out into the ether far enough that everything else in the existence or in that reality is going to be able to kind of register it and then create it, basically. So I think it's for increasing the potency of a manifest reality. That's why they say that if whatever you believe you're going to become, or that's how things are going to be, because the more emotion you put behind these things, whether it's fear or joy or anything like that, you're increasing the potency of that thing to be true. So it's very necessary. And I think what you were asking about, but which is the correct type of emotion, because there's a whole range of emotions. I think it is exactly this ecstatic emotion that is needed. I don't think it necessarily has to be the type of orgasm that most people experience like during a sexual intercourse. I think you can like, when I practice this, you start from the 0 point, and then with each level you doubling basically the level of emotion, and eventually like on level 3 or 4 you start having goosebumps, and it's basically you're just creating like a symphony within your entire body, but it's originating from the heart. So it's not coming from the sexual organs, it's originating from the heart, and you just feel it expanding, and like when you reach a level where you just feel like you're full up, you just can't expand anymore. What you do is at that point you drop back almost like a slap into 0 point again, like where you don't feel this energy, where you just feel zero, like neutral completely. What happens is that all this energy that you were radiating, creating, when you zap back into 0 point, it just stays there. It's almost like a cloud, it's been building, and then you just pull yourself back, and then that stays in there. So that's how you created the potency for it, basically. So it's most likely to manifest that. If anyone wants to practice that, let me know how it goes.
Thank you. So, as we're talking here, the thing, what I'm trying to, bring up here within the discussion is that, Reich's idea of this armoring, and that, right now there's a lot of thought forms that can be very charged with emotion that are going out from all kinds of people. But again, most people that are sending these thought forms out still have this armoring. So the emotion that's being attached to it may or may not be beneficial and may or may not stay. And the idea that maybe by using Orgone or different other practices to actually reduce the armoring around the heart, we can actually send out newer thought forms that will survive and that will have higher orgonomic potency and be more beneficial. And that's kind of where I'm trying to go with this discussion a little bit. And that's where we're going as we talk about these different ideas and concepts.
So I might be able to get in the ice bath after all.
You will. If you take just go and huff some Orgone from an Orgone shooter, and you'll be able to get in, no problem. Okay, any more comments before we move on to the orgonomic potency and sensitivity of the observer continued?
Yeah, I just was thinking this whole time that in human design, about half of the population has emotions. I mean, I guess we all have emotions, but really there are about half that are non-emotional beings, and they're picking up the energy from everybody that has the emotional response. So it's interesting because if you're non-emotional, you're amplifying the person that doesn't it's not necessarily your stuff. You're just bringing it out for everybody to see. So I think it's an interesting thing that what you're saying is very important, because whether you know it or not, you're putting stuff out there and it's being picked up by the collective everywhere, and what you're tapping into in that, morphogenic field is really, so the frequency at which you're at is affecting everyone around you, whether you know it or not. So, and the people that are looking maybe a little bit more emotional it's probably not even their energy. They're just expressing it from what they're picking up from other people. So
it's almost like they're an avatar for the other person.
Yeah, but that's how we're all connected. So interesting.
Any more comments before we move on? All right. So in the realm of non-living nature, so we're talking about, things that we think are non-living nature too, or ergonomic research finds that its best orientation when it adheres to what it has learned in the realm of living nature about the intensity of organ sensation, about the function of the orgastic convulsion, about the endoptic phenomenon, about biophysical field reactions beyond the skin surface of the organism. The unimpeded organotic functioning in the observer and the experimenter is therefore a requirement of the first importance in ergonomic natural research. It is regrettable that the thinker in a classical physics does not find his way toward the understanding of bioenergetic functioning in the observer, and that he is inextricably bound up with the view of the phenomenological psychology of some 50 years ago, in which consciousness and reason are still floating freely, unrooted, unconnected, and comprehended in empty space. I wish to summarize the functions that have been attributed to the ether by many researchers who try to describe the general substratum of all known physical phenomena. It is amazing to find that most of these functions, which have never been observed directly, coincide with many functions of the cosmic orgone energy, which have been observed directly and reproduced experimentally. The biopsychiatric problem that amuses us is this: observers of nature have described the cosmic primal energy correctly as far as its main functions are concerned. Still, they have been unable to make contact with these functions except by deduction. Direct observation and experimentation with the ether were closed to them. It is obvious that this fact is not to be attributed to the ether, but to the observer. Therefore, the problem is a biopsychiatric one. It is mainly concerned with the biophysics of perception, the interpretation of sense impression and organ sensation, as the whole development of orgonomy has so clearly demonstrated. There was only one access to the physical study to the ether, the organotic current in man, or expressed differently, the flow of the ether in man's membranous structure. For many ages, religions has called this primal force God. We begin to understand why most of the great physicists who dealt with cosmic problems, especially those of ether such as Newton, were occupied so intensely with the problem of God. So again, this book is called Ether, God, and Devil, which has to do with the concepts of God and devil, or evil, or what we call programming, or constraint of what is good and what is evil. So the idea here is that, as we observe this energy, which, we've talked a bit about whether or not chi and prana and orgone and different, BG3s from biogeometry are all the same, or are they actually different forms of the same energy? Or is one, more of a electric piezoelectric effect, and one more of a, what would the other energy be if we're not talking about? Is it truly like a God factor, inspirational factor, or is it really just the idea that this orgone, which is within the ether, when exposed to stimuli, produces effects that can be either beneficial, with the positive orgone, or can be negative with the detrimental orgone. Just as we can have waves that are beneficial and waves that are detrimental based upon how we affect the ether with whatever resonance we put into it. Because the resonance that we put into it is the effect that the ether will have on us, whether negative or beneficial, based on the wave pattern, waveform, and frequency. So this is the ideas that Reich was approaching. Like I said, he was not a mystic. He was not really even a big, God believer, religious person, I guess you'd say. He did believe there was something that was cosmic, that there was a force out there that animated everything. And that was the one impulse that, as we talked about the pulse and the wave itself, but the pulse that created the initial formation within the biosphere. So any comments on the idea that, it's not empty space, that we are all, and that I was listening to Alan Watts the other day, and he was making statements that, that throughout time, everyone believed that there was two different, us, right? There's the us that Bailey talks about, which is the personality, the straw man, the avatar, the 3D manifestation. And then there's our conscious self. But the conscious self is based upon the biological self that's on the ground. They affect each other. And within Bailey's work, she's saying that we have to bring that consciousness, that soul self, down into the biological self to make it much more aware of what it's doing and to influence us in a different way. And that is the influencer, and not just our animal or our animal self. And that we understood that we actually had two minds. We had an electric brain that recorded and had logic and had other things. Then we had a knowing brain, which is this Russellian, that we have this knowing concept that says, yes, this happened last time. That doesn't mean it's going to happen again, because of that to say that there is no chaos theory, that everything is always within a line, that, because you do X, Y, and Z, T is going to happen. That's not always the case. So any comments on the ideas of the consciousness of it being disconnected from the biological body, that there are two of us, and that the orgonomic functioning of the observer and experiment is therefore a requirement for the first importance of orgonomic research, meaning that we have to actually comprehend that we see this orgonomic function occurring, and to be aware that there is an ether also. Anybody have any ideas on the ether, or have any concepts on the ether?
I think there's a lot more. Well, I know Dr. Landor mentions it often, that people are part of the equation. Okay, so there's a lot of scientists now that are like that, but there's some that aren't.
And I think this is what we talked about with Lorraine also, where she was talking about the effects that our emotions have on others, and how, within the human design paradigm, each, we're almost like ants in a sense, that we each have some different roles that we play based on our makeup and based on our structures, that as we form the roots of the tree, say, that as we are each a leaf on that tree, we each pick up different energies and display energies differently, reflect light differently also. So the idea that as the collective, which Bailey also talks about, to maybe see, how we function within that collective and actually maximize our potential within that collective, can be very beneficial to the thought forms we create. And because some of the armoring we may have is that we don't quite understand our true natures as individuals, and therefore we are always at odds with others who are not like us, and we're trying to reach some idea of normal, which there really is none. And so we're constantly creating armor to make us normal, when there is really no normal out there. Okay, so I think it's our last slide. Yeah, our last slide really kind of is a summary of functions here. And so basically in this column, it says as required for ether, and then as observed in cosmic orgone. So these are two of the same columns, but I just broke them up. So this is 1 through 8, and this is 9 through 12. So as required for ether, again, this is in the book. This is what Reich is saying. He says it exists universally. It exists everywhere. There is no empty vacuum in space. Ether is all around us. We are like fish in water. Instead of water, we live in ether. That's our biome that we exist in. So he says, as observed in cosmic orgone energy, exists universally. Orgone accumulators operate everywhere. So he's saying because ether exists universally, orgone accumulators operate everywhere. He says ether fills all space. For cosmic orgone, fills all space. Orgone energy can be demonstrated in a vacuum, penetrates all matter. So he's saying that no matter where we are, it's always the media that's around us.
So we can take an accumulator to the moon and still make it work.
Yes.
Okay.
If there was a moon.
Yeah.
If
there was. Okay. It's the source. But that's, yeah. If you believe hard enough, there is one. Is the source of all energy. So ether is the source of all energy. For cosmic orgone, it varies and manifests itself as heat, static electricity, thunder and sheet lightning, electricity, magnetism, gravitational attraction. So what Reich's saying is that all energy source, so the potentiality, the potential around us is there is always orgone. I mean, there's always ether. Now that can be concentrated. It can have higher or lower potentials based upon how it's being concentrated, but it is always around us. But the potency or the orgonomic potency can be different based upon location and whether or not it's being concentrated or not. Changes into matter or mass. So they're saying that ether changes into matter or mass within the 3D. So Reich's saying that what we see as matter, what we see as solid is really the change of ether into a form. And so within the cosmic orgone, superimposition of 2 or more orgone energy waves, which he calls Creasewell, results in mass particle. So Reich saying that within the orgone dialectic, once we have 2 or more waves is where we actually begin to get this change into matter, superposition of 2 or more orgone energy waves. So for ether is responsible for the cohesion of atoms. And for orgone, it keeps unit of matter, bions together. Cohesive forces become free and demonstrable when solid matter disintegrates into bions equals orgone energy vesicles. So when we get back to the idea of bions, this was kind of the idea of, metachlorians. If you watch Star Wars, if you watch anything with the Jedi, the idea that there's a prima materia that can be formed. When we were reading Alice Bailey, she talks about how we as a being, as a consciousness, create kind of our own energetic field, which we then begin to gather parts of the ether to create our form. And our form is really made up of ether that we have formed. And sometimes we're actually forming of different sentient beings like atoms and cells, each having their own sentience as well as our own sentience on top of that. But all those sentiences form and speak to us constantly and are part of our overall sentience. But our soul self is what we need to get to control all those different voices within ourselves. That's what Bailey's saying. Reich really doesn't get into that here about, the difference between the idea of as we begin to be a cohesion of all these different energies, what we need to do to actually control that. But he's just saying that the cohesion is responsible so that the ether is cohesion of atoms. So he's an atomist at the heart. Number 7, it transmits light. transmits organotic excitation with the speed of light. Light is a manifestation of organotic illumination and is of local character. So Reich said earlier that he does not believe that light travels, that it's really the idea of this excitation of the ether field that creates illumination. So as the field is excited, it illuminates. And the number 8 is transparent. So is transparent can become visible as refraction of light, as heat waves and bad seeing. So the idea is that the orgone itself is transparent. It can become visible as reflection of light, which again, what is light? It is the excitation of the organotic, right? So as it becomes, the ether itself is transparent. As it becomes excited through either biology or metal or magnetism, it can then become visible. So any questions on 1 through 8 of the requirements of ether and the requirements of orgone energy?
I'm confused about the, he's calling it 2 different things now.
What?
No, I mean, orgone is not the same as ether?
No.
Anymore?
Well, what he's saying is, so in these columns we have as required for ether as absorbing cosmos. So what he's saying is that ether, like exists everywhere, but orgone, from what he's saying, is really once we begin to manifest energy with it, we can, as we excite the orgone, it becomes, as we excite the ether, it becomes more it creates organotic potentiality. And so, as we walk around in just our lives, we're walking around in ether, right? But as we begin to do things, as our body, our biosphere of the body, our biophysical body interacts with the ether, it can become greater or lesser, as we've talked about. The higher our organotic potential or potency, the greater the effect of the organotic field. So what he's saying is that the ether around us is always there, but our ability to excite it or to create highly organotic potency is based on our health and our organotic potency. Do you understand, Doug? So it's that the ether is always there. Its potential is either decreased or increased by our own health and awareness.
I do have a question.
Theory.
Yeah, in theory. Again, that's just his theory, but he's saying that he's seen this through his 25 years of experience building these boxes and everything else. Go ahead, Lorraine.
Yeah, so it's just he's talking about the orgone is like the light body that we have, the light that we emit. Do you think?
Well, that's part of it. I mean,
Okay.
but we have an aura, right? Which in our chakras, each one has a different color. Last week we talked about that. The idea that the blue. I mean, the orgone's a blue that he sees, right? That he's saying he sees a blue, a violet, a violet blue, and then it can become white with kind of like lightning. Just think about looking at the sky, right? You have a blue and then you have the white lightning.
Okay.
So
yeah.
And so that's really, you're seeing orgone in the sky. And so when you concentrate.
So what's the difference between that and plasma then?
Well, plasma is the illumination, basically. I mean, so you would have ether all around. So ether is there. And then when the orgone, when the ether gets excited, it begins to illuminate. And that's what we would probably call plasma.
Okay.
Get this transmission of light.
Yeah, so cool.
Right. So this is, and he's saying that's an excitation of the ether. So
that makes sense.
So yeah, and there's some others that talk about that also, that what we see is really this excitation of the wave manifestation, the pulse. So what we talked about, I think it was last week, wasn't it, about the waves and the pulses, that as this pulse comes in, it's creating a wave, and this wave is what we're seeing, this excitation. And then as those two or more come together, we have two or more that two or more orgone energy waves come together, then we create matter or mass. So it's this excitation of the orgone, this interaction of the waves, just as I think it was Gabby was talking about the form that we saw on the collage, you know, how they intersect. That's really kind of seeing these different ideas of these orgone energy waves, right, intersecting and where they meet. I think Russell calls it a corpuscle, you know, and that's kind of like this intersection of these waves that then we can see as matter, but then they go away just as quick, right? That's why, you know, things don't always stay the same. There's no constant to it, but our memory records it as being real, and therefore we make decisions based on these images we have in our mind rather than our true knowing. And that's how we create logic that we think we can then interpolate to the future.
And what happened to primary water, which I thought that was everything?
Well, primary water is like, it's really just another manifest. I mean, when you think of ether, and this is the thing, and when we get back to Russellian concepts of, you know, the spinning into matter, spinning in, you know, the octave as we get denser and denser, primary water is basically the ether at its sentient level to where it's manifesting, you know, all aspects of us. I mean, we are basically a water being. We're 98% water and, you know, 2% chemical. So what's that mean? Well, that means that we have a very high concentration of hydrogen and oxygen in our form that we are bringing together, as we talked about. Our sentience is bringing together this energetic form that is mainly water, which is primary.
But also the air around us is mainly water. It's like dependent on where you are. Like in our house, we keep it at minimum 60% water in the air. So I think everywhere around you is water. It's it just depends, you know, like whether there is a percentage of other mediums as well. But to add to the light not traveling but being an excitation of particles of the ether makes sense to me, because that's how wave mechanics work. It's a disturbance in a medium, like when you drop a stone in water, the water is the medium and the water droplets don't travel from the, you know, this end to the other end of the pond. They just one particle pushes the next, that pushes the next, you know, so it's like a passing hands. But that friction is the excitation, isn't it? It's like you're concentrating, you're reducing the space between the two until they repel. And I think this is probably what happens with whatever the ether medium is. I'm guessing a lot of it is water. And so this kind of like with the orgonites as well, how the crystals energy gets kind of compressed. I feel like this all adds up and makes sense. And also with the ascension process and like, you know, like our light bodies, but also becoming light beings, the higher we vibrate, like the higher the higher energies we can hold, makes sense why it wouldn't take like a physical form anymore. It would be because it would be exciting so much that it will be just light the whole time, you know, if you know what I mean. So in my mind it adds up, it makes complete sense.
Yes, and that's a great correlation, is that as we begin to reach into this light body that we've talked about, right, that people talk about, that we actually begin to excite the ether in a different way. And that's why the idea of, you know, the right thinking that Bailey talks about, the right emotion that we talk about, are all concepts that we have to understand and develop in order to get to the light body, because that will influence the emotions that we have on the ether. Because the lower thought forms we have, the lower emotional thought forms we have, brings us back down into a lower emotional state, which keep us density in matter.
I'd love to hear what Cosmic says about it, because I mean, from water you can make anything, any mineral, anything at all. How does the ether come in?
Well, the ether, I mean, ether would be a base level of water. So ether and water would be like the first step up. Once you add hydrogen to basic ether, you're at water. I mean, and water then becomes the base element. So, but as Gabby also said, there's water all around us also. I mean, there's elements all around us. The ether is just really like the prima materia, as they call it, which is
and what is it if you said you add oxygen or hydrogen to the ether to make water?
Well, water is oxygen and hydrogen, H2O, right? 2 parts. So the ether, as it says here, is that, so ether is the changes into matter or mass. So once you have ether, it has no matter or mass. Water has matter and mass. Even as steam, it has matter and mass. It's just very light matter and mass. So once anything becomes into a 3D reality, so once anything becomes manifest into a 3D reality, then it is no longer ether. Ether is what is out there that is not in it. It's transparent. You can't see it. It has no mass in itself. Mass is created once we begin to excite it or superimpose thought form on it to bring it into a 3D reality.
So could ether be like a potentiality blueprint type thing, and then from which everything can manifest and dependent on, what?
Yes, that is the base concept of ether, correct.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's based on potentiality, high potentiality, low potentiality. That's when you get into the accumulators, you're increasing the potentiality, you're increasing the concentration, and therefore you have higher potential. And you bring in more because it's lower potential on the outside. That's why it's called an accumulator.
This is clever stuff, all this. I like it.
It's his, it's his theories based on what he saw for 25 years and then more on his own development of these concepts.
Does this kind of correlate with what we did with Walter Russell?
Oh, yes.
Where we have the, that diagram you have, where all the gases and the inert gases, and then I'm wondering where ether was in there. Maybe anyway.
Ether is nowhere. Ether
wasn't there on there. It was because those are all.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. Okay.
Once you get on that diagram, you're no longer ether.
It's what I thought. Yeah.
You're manifested in the 3D.
But so that blue light that he saw
is orgone.
It would be on there somewhere if I remember.
Yeah. Well, it's again, like I said, that's the idea of the orgone. Is it energy? Is it hydrogen? I mean, like I said, it has a lot of. The idea of the orgone has a lot of similarities to hydrogen, right? Orgone and hydrogen has a lot of similarities in terms of color and what they can do and the health benefits. So I don't know if they are or not, but again, it's it's kind of like the idea that as we age, we dry out. It's not really that. I don't think that's the gravitation that causes wrinkles as much as it is that we dry out, right? And we're no longer as supple as we once were. So the idea that orgone may keep the elasticity or the ability for our cells to, hang on to this this vital force, which is really water, right? Which is really the idea to hold hydrogen and manifest hydrogen as the base element, because from that all other elements are in our 3D reality really come from. That could be the idea of what we're doing, is that we're just really super, saturating our bodies with life force, hydrogen or water or whatever we want to call it, so that we now become much healthier, because we're this idea that this high potential, this high positive is pushing out all the negative orgone that we have in our bodies, this bad orgone, which is causing disease. Again, these are just theories. I'm not saying that's what he's saying. I'm just, intuiting.
Do you think that this is where distilled water comes in then? Because I haven't experienced this myself yet, but I've heard that when people only drink distilled water for a while, like for a few months, and a lot of it, it's basically just nothing but water, right? It's just H2O. There's no minerals, nothing in it. And do you think that could be why they're experiencing this like returning of like their youth, because like their hair turns back to color and their wrinkles go away and all this kind of stuff? So is it possible that once you like you concentrate this pure water essentially in your body, could that like basically turn back this type of dehydration time?
Well, I think, yeah, I wish Cosmic
That's
was
where
here
the body did.
because he could help us more. But yeah, but I believe that. I mean, I think it was, oh, what's the guy's name? Can't even think of his name. The guy with the beard, the doctor who's Amanda's friend, who talked about the water. You know, Giselle.
Russell.
Kaufman?
No, Kaufman.
Kaufman.
Dr. Kaufman, had the whole talk about water and how much we needed it, how much you needed, and so on. So, I personally believe that I know the more hydrated I am, the better my skin looks, right? I mean, the less wrinkly it looks, the more, and so I do believe that, we don't drink good water. I mean, the difference between primary water and what we drink is that we drink processed water for the most part from processed plants that put in, different chemicals and things. The more distilled water you drink, the distilled water will actually help you draw heavy metals out of your body also. So that's another, big distinction with distilled water, and you are drinking pure water. That's, I think, the idea, even though I believe that primary water may contain minerals because it is from the earth. It's not like it's distilled water. Rainwater can be, considered primary water. I would think that even primary water, if it's coming from the earth, would still pick up some minerals. So that would be a good question for Cosmic. But the idea of the water, the primary water, is that it's being created from the earth, and that it is actually absent any man-made, pollutants, whether it be chlorine or other additives that may be coming into it, and would be more bioaccessible to us also, meaning that it would be, through osmosis, we could actually take the water in. Oftentimes the water that we may drink, if our cells are so polluted that the membranes are the energetic capacity of the cell, because I don't even know if everybody believes in cell theory anymore with membranes and that, but I would say that that aspect of that living thing that makes up our bodies, which has an energetic barrier which holds in the mitochondria and the energy, how permeable that is to allow water in and out will determine how much water we can hold. And as that breaks down and we can no longer absorb as much water, that's where we dry out and age.
How many months was that, Gabby?
What was
2 years, I think, she said, for drinking distilled water.
Oh well, I've heard different stories. I only just started drinking it. I know, but like I'm almost only drinking just. I just thought, let me try this out. I've been thinking of it a long time, and I've been telling Giselle about my experience on that, because my urine turned very bright. So I was thinking, am I passing cadmium? Like what's going on here? I didn't have that when I was taking zeolite, like nano zeolite and things like that. So I was like, where does this come from? But anyway, it's still it's still early days. I've only been doing it for a few weeks, but I've heard that after like 3 or 4 months of drinking a gallon a day is when people started experiencing like drastic changes, like the eyesight, the vision returning to like, good, and all this kind of cosmetic stuff happening. Yeah, I wish Cosmic was here to ask, because I was going to ask about the primary water actually. I'm thinking, but I don't know, he can probably verify. I'm thinking that maybe when primary water, especially when it's in the earth, like it inside the crust of the earth, we've got the crystal layer there, so many crystals there, and when water is in that chamber, in these chambers, like it gets the most beautiful harmonics, I think, installed into it. So I think it's probably installed with so many healing codes when it's coming from there. And I think what we're trying to replace that with is like us using our own little crystals, like, with the water and all this sort of stuff. So I think what we're doing generally with this sort of thing, trying to kind of mimic what primary water is a good direction, but of course it's never going to be as powerful as when it has actually been inside the cradle. Yeah, that's what I imagine. But yeah, we can maybe check Cosmic on that.
The crystals are from water. That's how they created. The crystals aren't giving something to the water. The water changed into crystals.
Yeah,
transmuted itself.
But yeah,
right, but don't they harmonize? Like,
Mhm.
don't they have the potential, like, let's say all this chemical stuff falls out, you know, because they're spraying the air and blah, 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 and it goes and filters down into the earth. And then for it to become non-wastewater and recycled water and all the shit that gets poured out into, you know, our rivers and everywhere. I'm guessing that this is like a healing chamber inside. I don't know if the crystals are helping or the other way around, but some, you know, I'm imagining some magic taking place in there.
Yeah, the idea is that, you know, it's all a form of water, but the different forms will have different resonance. And also, as the crystals form, they have different geometric shapes. So, you know, the idea of a cube shape or a triangular shape or whatever, or a polyhexahedron that, you know, Cosmic talks about, like the heart, right? Decadahedron, will have a different resonance. So as that water begins to become solid and begins to form crystals, it will have a different resonance and have a different effect on the water itself because of the solid form it's taken and the resonance it now has based on shape, form, and angle, as in biogeometry.
And it has memory as well.
Exactly. So any more questions before we go on to number 9? Okay. So as required for ether, you know, we're going to go back to the same type of thing. So on the left-hand side is, you know, pertains to ether. On the right-hand side pertains to orgone and kind of how they relate. So number 9 is there is no heat in ether. And for cosmic orgone, most organotic functions are cold. Lumination, movement through wire attractions. However, reflections by metal creates heat, as does highly mobile concentrations within matter, planet, and organism. So this is the idea that Russell has, is that space is cold because of low potentiality, because there, you know, if you don't see matter in space, and it has low potential, and that it's cold, and that as we begin to have the attraction or gravitation, we begin to see heat, and we begin to see matter, and we begin to see concentration. So within the Russellian idea of the radiation and concentration, the concentration is hot, it's red, right? The radiation is cold, it's blue, which is space. So the ideas that we're talking about here is that within ether, it has no heat in ether. So it is just, again, that transparent medium that all things come from. There's no loss of energy. So no loss of energy. However, there is an energy metabolism, flow toward higher level, just as we talked about within the Orgone accumulator, from the outside to the inside, from low potential to high potential, maintenance, a higher level capacity. So each organism has a capacity that if it goes above the capacity, it will explode because it's holding too much energy, and discharge toward lower level. So we will pull it from a higher level, but we can also discharge to lower levels. Is resting stationary. Earth moves through ether like a rotating ball on stagnant water. Is always in wavy and pulsatory motion. The Orgone envelope moves more rapidly in the galactic Orgone ocean than the Earth's globe. Analogy is that of a ball rolling on water waves moves more slowly than the waves. So again, he is not a flat earther. Reich saying that, you know, the Earth moves through the ether like a rotating ball in stagnant water. So it's kind of just, you know, the ether itself is stagnant in a sense that it's there, but it does flow from higher to lower. Well, that's orgone. So the ether is stagnant. As it moves through, it creates orgone, right? Because things begin to excite it. As we have movement, we begin to have excitation, creating orgone, and that the orgone envelope moves more rapidly in the galactic Orgone ocean than the Earth's globe. So the reason it probably moves faster is that you don't have the idea that you have friction on the Earth. You're going to have more things to stop the orgone movement, to where in space it'd be moving more freely. There would be less friction or other solids to inhibit it or excite it. You know, so it's truly moving at a more rapid than the galactic Orgone ocean. That's orgone, right? Ether is stationary. So ether stationary, or so once the noun ether becomes a verb, orgone, right? We have movement. Okay, cannot be demonstrated. So ether cannot be demonstrated. Misconception of the Michelson-Morley experiment. We talked a lot about that. I think it was the first or second week we talked about the Michelson-Morley. If anybody is not aware of what the Michelson-Morley experiment was, it was an attempt to prove that ether existed or didn't exist. But from what Reich says, there was false assumptions made, was due to assumptions that the ether was stationary and that light traveled through space. So the idea here is that light doesn't travel. So that was one of the assumptions of the Michelson-Morley experiment. And so it's clearly demonstratable everywhere, visually, thermically, electroscopically, with Geiger counters, accounts for phenomena in nature. Here to the nature leak, natural leak, bad scene, field action in nifty space, static, cosmic rays, so on and so forth. So what he's saying is that you can observe ether, but you can observe the effects of excitation, which he calls orgone, or light, or these other. You can observe phenomenon of ether. You can't observe ether itself because it's transparent. So any questions on the summary of function of ether as compared to cosmic orgone energy?
I don't know if I have a question or a comment, but a few months ago I had asked Robert Grant to answer the question, what is plasma, what is ether, what is water, primary water? And he said that ether is a subconscious thought or an ideation medium that brings information into coherence into the physical plane. So it's just the thing that exists, but it's crystalline, or no, it's geometric structures that are created through thoughts. And then plasma, becomes something that is more observable, and then water even more so, which is, our DNA is created and everything is created.
That's
so it was interesting.
That's the idea of the excitation, right? As the wave becomes more and as it goes into the higher and higher octave, right, becomes denser and denser. All right. So everything we see, everything we experience is basically a different stage of ether.
Yes.
With ether being the primary, which is transparent, that we can't see, that we can't demonstrate. That's kind of what Reich's saying. You can't demonstrate ether. You can only really demonstrate the phenomenon, right? Which he's calling that you can clearly demonstrate orgone visually with all these Geiger counters. So we can observe the phenomenon in ether, but we can't observe ether itself.
Right. Well, I'll post that in the chat. More of what he said.
Okay, great. Any more questions before we wrap up here, or comments or ideas that or thoughts that were provoked by what we've talked about? Anybody?
I think it's going to be useful for us. To me, it was we used everything that we learned in Walter Russell, and because when we're studying Alice Bailey, I think it makes it a bit more understanding. Yeah, for me anyway.
Yeah, because he's like I said, Reich is pretty much strictly a scientist. He's not a mystic. Besides, he believes that there is like a God or a force behind all this, which he's calling ether. To where Bailey, is less scientific, right, and more mystical in a sense. So it kind of brings the two together in a way that we can understand both and make maybe Bailey more consumable, than just mysticism and the ideas of masters and these different. Even though Bailey does talk a little bit about the biophysical body and how important it is, she doesn't really talk about this energy of ether, the transmission. Any more comments or before we close out today? I wonder if everybody can stick around for a little while, because I do want to talk about what we're going to talk about next week. So for right now, any more comments before I close out? Doug, anybody want to say anything before I close out? All right, anybody? Brian? Anything, thank you. All right, so I'm going to close out with this is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter, with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, coming to you from the Rogue River Valley in Southern Oregon with the Walter Russell Secret of Light group. Thank you all for attending. If you're watching the video and you like it, please like it and subscribe. We're going to continue with these conversations. As Giselle said, we're going to continue with Alice Bailey and begin to look at, now that we have Walter Russell and Wilhelm Reich kind of under our belts a bit, we may be able to talk a little bit more about the scientific aspects of white magic as we discover that. So with all that being said, again, thank you all for attending. It's always a pleasure to share thoughts and ideas with like-minded people, even though that aren't like-minded, but are willing to talk and discuss. So thank you so much, and we'll see you all next week.